Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry.
I'm going to take the woman second from the aisle. Yep.
Thank you very much, Special Envoy Kerry. My name is Belinda Sherpa. I'm with climate think tank E3G. I have three short questions.
I'm really sorry.
Okay,
I'm really sorry.
I'll have one then.
Pick your best one. But
on your point on China, given that China has suspended the bilateral talks and given the increased geopolitical tensions, are you considering other ways of influencing China's calculus on climate change beyond bilateral cooperation, such as increasing the US's own climate action, such as through the IRA and other bits, but also by perhaps stepping up your NDC at the upcoming COP, and by increasing relations with countries in the Global South and stepping up financial commitments, such as to the Global Shield? Thank you.
Thanks very much. People have got long, intricate points, which are terrific. But okay, China and Scotland. On
Scotland, your question almost answers itself. To be honest with you, of course, hydro. Now you got to choose. You got to be careful. I mean, given the changes that are taking place and the warming, you got to make some real analyses as to whether that hydro is going to be there in 10, 20, 30 years. But if you've got sourcing and capacity to really make that work, absolutely go for it. And we're going to wind up pumping water to places without any doubt in my mind. I mean, I look at the United States and we see what's happening with respect to New Mexico, Colorado, California, Arizona. It's always had a water challenge. Now it's super. So we're going to have to find ways to deal with that all around the world. And I'm confident we will. I don't think that's not as complex in many ways. We'll also have probably massive desalinization in various places, miniature nuclear batteries, so to speak, and other options are available as to how you power that. And so there'll be, significant. But there's going to be, I think there was many books written about water and conflict and the potential for conflict. We really need to be forward-leaning and prescient about beating, the point where people are fighting over. They already fight about water in various parts of the world. We got to prevent that from becoming a wholesale new security challenge on a global basis. So in China, look, I'm genuinely hopeful that Xi Jinping and I will be able to get together when we get to Glasgow. I don't know, get to Sharm el-Sheikh. And, but we can't just rely on that. We obviously have to find other ways of dealing. If we can't get together with China, and if we don't reach a meeting of the minds as to how we do the two things, we agreed to do three things in Glasgow with China. One, that they will come up with an ambitious methane action plan for this year that they will release at the COP. And we hope to see that and be able to work on it with them, actually, which is what we'd wanted to do in these prior months. We also agreed to accelerate their transition out of coal to the degree that we can, and ours, to work together. Now, our plan is to be coal-free basically by 2030 and to be carbon-free in our power sector by 2035, and I believe we'll get there. But if we can't get agreement, then what the EU has been talking about with respect to a countervailing border adjustment of some kind, I don't think our companies or yours are going to want to sit there for the next 10 years paying for the cost of reducing and making that transition and producing products that reflect the increased price of those products because of it, where there is an increased price, while other countries are just producing dirty and trying to sell to the marketplace. So I think you will see an adjustment there unless people step up and join together. But right now, those alternatives are, as I said earlier today, folks, far cheaper. I mean, I did not complete the thought with respect to the adequacy of how you price coal, but look at the cost of black lung around the world. Look at the cost of air pollution around the world. We lose 15 million people a year to the quality of air on this planet. That's pollution, and much of that pollution is called greenhouse gases. So we need to get serious about the real costs of the particulates we put into the atmosphere. And if we reflected that cost, even though solar and wind beat fossil fuel, hands down, without putting that in, you put that in, and it's just off the charts. So if you're involved in actuarial judgments and you're involved in accountability and transparency in the marketplace, increasingly, I believe, corporations will be called on to look down the road to their supply chains and to their distributed chains as to what sort of costs are really included in their cost of products.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm going to come in a moment to online ones, but here in the corner and then straight behind you.
Thank you. Hi, Victoria Seabrook from Sky News. We've seen some rowing back on environmental protections in the UK. Alok Sharma has lost his cabinet position. How concerned are you that the UK is ditching its climate leadership role? Thank you.
Well, I can't, there's no way me fairly to measure that in the sense that you've just had a government for what, 1 day, 2 days?
The jokes are too easy, but yeah.
So I've had the pleasure of meeting Rishi, and I respect his basic approach and his intelligence, and I think, you know, the confidence of the country rides with him now. Let's see where it goes.
Thank you. Straight behind.
I'm Dr. Isiaku Shitu Al-Mustafa from University of Plymouth, an independent port management consultant. Thank you for your leadership, Senator John Kerry. My question is very simple. You've analyzed key issues. Within African perspective, Africa emits just tiny portion of GAG, global emission. But the issue is this: Nigeria, Mozambique, Tanzania have huge gas resources. What are the specific framework the US and the world superpowers are doing to ensure these gas reserves, which is the next energy transition globally, friendlier, cleaner than crude oil? That is one option. Second question, what do you think of carbon pricing?
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Oh, you want me? Let me
No,
just do it
I'll
quickly.
answer those ones.
On a personal level, I say this because it was a matter of record before I took the job on, and I have favored carbon pricing for some period of time. It's not yet, you know, it's not the policy of the United States yet, and you know, the president has been very clear that he wanted to pursue other ways of trying to see if we can move forward. And we'll see where we wind up on that as we go forward. So, but on the gas issue, I don't, you know, I don't want any of this to get misinterpreted in terms of the gas issue, because gas is going to be part of the transition. It is right now. It's already there. And because of what Russia has done, cutting it off to Europe, we are, US and others, trying to provide and make up for that loss of gas. But over the long haul, gas is also obviously a fossil fuel. It does have CO2 emissions and methane. And methane is the most damaging gas of all. It's 20 to 80 times more destructive than CO2. And we've seen large emissions of methane as a consequence of the breach in the Baltic Sea, and also leaks that are taking place around the world. So methane is very much on the map now. It wasn't on the map when we were in Paris that much. It began to be obviously at Glasgow, and now, you know, to a super degree, it's not a stepchild of this process any longer. Gas, if you're replacing coal or you're replacing oil, is a 30 to 50% immediate reduction. So can you get reductions between now and 2030 if you were to put some gas on the line? Yes. But after you get to 2030, if you're going to continue on the track to net zero by 2050, you're going to have to also be able to capture the emissions of that gas. And so there will be a premium on capture and storage and utilization. But unless we get that, folks, you can't be this is part of the self-delusion factor I mentioned. You can't pretend that building out a 30 to 40-year infrastructure to have a major gas facility is somehow going to be okay unless you can capture the emissions. And that's going to be a critical measure of these next few years. Does it remain a possible alternative if you can capture the emissions? For sure, absolutely. But that's got to be cost competitive with the other forms of energy that are going to begin lowering costs, like green hydrogen and other things. That's something I can't sit here. We're not going to work that out today. But you've got to recognize and enter into your policy decision the reality of the danger of 30 and 40-year infrastructure that gets built that will be stranded assets under most judgments. And I think that that there are other ways to provide some of that energy in the meantime. But it will be part of this transition for sure, if managed correctly and effectively.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the questions. Right, on the aisle, about 2/3 of the way back. Sorry, further back behind you. Yes, I'm trying to give some justice to people who are very, very quick.
John Warren, physician. Thank you. In COP26, electric cars were in, increased GDP. Anybody who cycles and walks is out. It decreases GDP. Are you open to any solutions to climate that do not increase consumption, do not increase GDP?
Thank you. And here at the front, please.
Thank you. Fahani Amin. When would be a good time for richer countries to apologise for their lack of compliance over the last 3 decades? Is it Sharm el-Sheikh, or is it another COP, or is it another place?
Thank you.
To apologize for what?
For their lack of compliance, the lack of implementation. Yeah.
Well, I am supportive, we are supportive, President Biden is supportive of anything that will produce sustainability and which is adopted by a country and that can be implemented and put in place. We support nature-based solutions. We started this last year, we created the most significant broad-based joint effort with Brazil, which includes all of our key agencies in the U.S. government, the EPA, Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, because there's criminal activity involved in the logging and the destruction of these forests. So we've been looking really hard at what we could do to change the equation with Brazil. And likewise with DRC. We're talking with DRC about how to proceed forward. But yeah, sustainability, I don't know a nation in the world, regrettably, that's living sustainably, and nor are most human beings. We've destroyed 50% of the species on the planet. That continues, and we have a tall order to shift into a sustainable structure. I really think, obviously, with the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN and other countries, and with ESG, which is now in every boardroom of the world, hopefully we may be able to turn a corner. But we're not there yet, and for this lady who asked a particularly pregnant question, every day people, but rather than apologizing every day, the best thing you could do to apologize is get about the business of getting it done. Implement, make it happen. And we owe that to all of us, our citizens, today, tomorrow. But I wouldn't hope, there are some countries which still, I mean, if you want to look at Russia, folks, in terms of what's happening, not just in Ukraine, but their extractive activities are one of the most destructive on the planet right now. And because of their permafrost thawing, their extractive facilities are undergoing instability with respect to the land mass now, which is shifting because of the thawing and the emissions that are coming out and so forth. So there are just really big dangers out there that are going to require a remarkable level of cooperation. And frankly, it really needs to be almost at a war like you've really declared you're at war and you're going to win. And you organize everything to be working in that same direction, and we have not yet organized ourselves appropriately. Paul Kennedy has a book out called The Engineers of Victory, and he writes about how in World War II, key decisions were made and implemented with respect to how you win. Gaining control of the skies, gaining control of the ocean, knowing how you were going to penetrate the defenses that Hitler had built up and down the coastline. Those and other decisions had to be made. They were made at mid-levels because people were empowered and given the ability because you had to win. I think we need that same purpose here, if you will, and same sort of coordination.
We already have a war on with Russia, which doesn't make it easier. That's not a flip point. I'm going to, there's a forest of hands up. I'm going to take two specifically about helping Africa in this from online, and thank you for sending them. One from Salah Kamil Salah saying, an honor to have this discussion. Is the USA, public and private sectors, pulling its weight in the renewables field? If not, why? China and India have a big renewables footprint in Africa, offering cheaper technology, more effective deployable research and development. What about the US? And the other one from Temitope Akintunde, saying that this is the view of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce in Nigeria, and saying there is not as much awareness about climate change here. There is a need for government-to-government collaboration on the issue of climate change. What is your perspective? What are you going to contribute on that?
On government collaboration?
Yes.
Government to government.
Government to government.
Well, I'm here. I mean, we're working at this constantly. I was with Ed Miliband, a bunch of members of parliament today, and our government is talking about it. We have a team over here, by the way, now from National Security Council who are working together with the new government, and we're going to work at it. We're open to any collaboration globally, which brings me to the question about China. We used to be a producer of renewable energy, producer in the sense of building solar panels and wind energy. And China, as you all know, years ago came into the WTO, and this is one of the other areas where we have disagreements. We have big disagreements with China about their practices with respect to the marketplace. And the fact is, as you all know, even Germany was a huge investor and purveyor of solar energy. And then, of course, dumping took place. Massive amounts of underpriced goods came in, and the market shifted to where it is today. 95% of all solar panels come out of China, or 70% of all panels, and 95% come out with some wafer or ingot, whatever involved, that links it to Xinjiang and the possibilities of slave labor producing some of those goods. And so you all know that people have taken a moral position with respect to that. The Chinese have reached out to me about whether or not some of the panels are being held up inappropriately, and we'll look at that because we need to know. But that's where global practices are somewhat more complicated. The fact is that we have a big difference with China over its practices regarding intellectual property and the protections that should be afforded intellectual property and access to the marketplace on a fair basis and other kinds of questions. So those issues have got to be worked out, and we've got to engage with China on those issues, and we have to separate climate from those issues. But on occasion, sometimes it sort of commingles, as it does on this issue of the panels coming in and whether we're going to have a fair opportunity for other supply chains. Now, I see other countries now really bending over backwards to develop those other supply chains. And I think the market will even out over a period of time here to some degree, and part of it will come from that enforcement. But we're prepared to work with a lot of countries to make sure that the marketplace rules are applied in a way that's fair, and that we develop multiple supply chains, and there's no cornering of the market in ways that do injury to the whole notion of fair trade and, and cooperation.
Okay, thank you for that. Right, over here on the aisle.
Thank you. Secretary Kerry, I'm David Pollock, a supporter of Chatham House. I'd like to ask you about the efforts to mobilize climate finance for the Global South from private institutional capital. They obviously have said very publicly, like the Net Zero Asset Owners Association, they need concessionary capital to come from other sources. You've recognized that. The MDBs are only part of the picture. DFIs, by and large, aren't providing concessionary capital. So what efforts are being made between governments and with the national DFIs to get them to do their part? Because we need them to get it to mobilize capital at scale from the private sector.
Thank you very much. And here in the front, Bernice.
Hi, Bernice Lee from Chatham House. I mean, the dramatic cost reduction you talked about earlier was a result of a more open, globalized economy, and the world has changed. So I just wonder, in that context, what is your worst and best case scenario for COP27?
Oh. Concessionary capital, and best and worst.
I think the biggest problem that I've seen as I travel to these countries and we try to cope with the need to accelerate this transformation, this transition, the single biggest problem is lack of funds, not lack of technological capacity, even though we have 44 or so technologies that need to be brought to scale faster. But we still have a basic grouping that could allow us to transform much more rapidly. The restraint is that when I sit with one of these presidents, and in the case of these particular three, they're all they say, they have said, I can't do this without some money. And as we have dealt with GFANs and the banks and the large financial institutions over the last years, bringing them to the table, they are ready to deploy trillions of dollars, but as an investment, which means you're going to try to make money. They need bankable deals. And the question for us is, how do you make bankable deals? How do you create bankable deals? Well, that's a mosaic of things that need to change. In some cases, it's transparency in a country, or contract rules, laws, arbitration. How are the downsides going to play out? Because most businesses want to know how they protect their investment. And we don't have the concessionary funding, which implies we're going to go in ready to lose money, or we're going to go in with philanthropic money, which is a grant anyway, and you're giving it to create the concessionary status. We have to formalize that much more effectively, which is what we're working on right now. Now, I believe, and the MDBs are a part of it, but only a part of it, but they can put many more concessionary dollars on the table, no question about it. And you can create blended finance structures where you have some philanthropy here, you have some state money, public money, you have some maybe sovereign immunity that you're willing to grant. You may have some local guarantees that you grant. I mean, there are ways to construct, but it all takes time, folks. We've got to move faster in certain ways. So one of the things we're looking at is the possibility of the private sector, in effect, being enticed to the table, because you have a way of them getting something they need and want, which might be a credit towards their goal, and you get cash that goes directly into closing down some coal plants and deploying renewables, which is direct emissions reduction. So there's nothing phony about it if you can create that construct correctly. So we're working on that. And I hope perhaps even by Sharm el-Sheikh, we might be in a position to outline that together with the MDB reform. Boy, we could put some money on the table. And if you can get concessionary funding, you get $10 billion of concessionary money, you've actually got about $100 billion using leverage and accelerating the process. So I think we're not yet proficient enough in applying some of the tools of the trade that could really open this up. And that's where I think there's as much opportunity in the private sector, frankly, as anywhere else to try to make this transition happen faster.
I'm going to take one more from the audience.
Wasn't there another?
Best and worst from Shyam. Yes.
Well, I'm an optimist. I'm not going to deal with worsts.
Okay, great.
But I will deal with best. I think the best is that we see a significant effort to implement what was promised in Glasgow, but that you also have a large grouping, a certain size grouping of those countries that were outside of the Glasgow promise who are coming on board with either a JETP or their own plan for how they're going to deploy. India, for instance, has made a commitment to deploy 500 gigawatts of clean energy. Now, they're pushing to do that. And if they can do that in the next 8 years, and we're going to work as hard as we can, or as they will let us with them, to be able to help that happen, if they did that, India is in compliance with 1.5 degrees, folks. What a message to the developing world of possibilities. So that's worth fighting for, and that's one of the things we're trying to do. If that can get locked down a little better in Sharm el-Sheikh, together with, let's say, Mexico or Indonesia doing some big things, then I think we're starting to show people how this template can work and finance transition.
I've made an unbreakable promise to Secretary Kerry that we are going to end at 4, which is now. I am so sorry, there's a forest of hands up here. There are terrific questions online, including huge ones. Satish Nair, thank you for the one about keeping population levels down. One from Toby Aykroyd, beautifully phrased about bioenergy in Europe and the emissions attached to that. But we can't get to any of these, even you on the aisle who've been so patient. So thank you all for your questions. Thank you for coming. And can you join me in thanking John Kerry?